Donald Trump declared today that Israel and Iran had agreed to a complete and total ceasefire following a limited Iranian missile strike on a U.S. military installation in Qatar. The attack was reportedly in retaliation for the American strikes, sanctioned without congressional approval, on Iranian nuclear facilities over the weekend. In a statement posted to his Truth Social platform, Trump said the truce would be implemented in stages over a 24-hour period beginning around midnight Eastern Time on Tuesday. He explained that this timeline would allow both sides to wrap up any ongoing operations, adding that the deal would mark the official end of the conflict. Neither Israel nor Iran immediately confirmed Trump's statement or commented publicly on the ceasefire. Despite the missile launch, Trump characterized Iran's action as restrained, calling it a very weak response, and noting that Tehran had given advanced warning to avoid casualties. No injuries were reported from the strike, which targeted Al Udeid Air Base, a key American military hub in Qatar. Qatar strongly condemned the strike, labeling it a flagrant violation of its sovereignty and international law. Qatari officials claim that most of the missiles were intercepted, though it remains unclear if the single missile that wasn't caused any damage. Iranian officials stated that the number of missiles fired matched the number of bombs dropped by the US in recent attacks on Iranian nuclear infrastructure. They also emphasized that they deliberately aimed for a sparsely populated area to reduce potential casualties, suggesting an interest in de-escalating tensions. The Qatari Major General reported that 19 missiles were launched towards the airbase, home to the US-led Combined Air Operations Center and the 379th Air Expeditionary Wing. Trump, however, said only 14 missiles were fired, 13 of which were intercepted, with one left unimpeded due to its low risk. Trump suggested that Iran was now ready to pursue peace and said he would encourage Israel to follow suit. Still, Israeli military operations appear to continue today, targeting key symbols of Iran's ruling establishment in what appeared to be an escalation of its offensive. Tehran confirmed the missile strike in a state TV broadcast accompanied by patriotic music, calling the operation a mighty and successful response to U.S. aggression. Iran's president stated on X that while Iran did not start the war, it would not allow acts of hostility to go unanswered. As the conflict entered its 11th day, hostilities between Iran and Israel intensified. Iranian drones and missiles struck Israeli cities, including Tel Aviv and Haifa, while Israel launched attacks on what it described as government-linked targets in Tehran. Israeli officials emphasized that they were not pursuing regime change, despite Donald Trump suggesting otherwise on social media. On Sunday, Trump posed a rhetorical question on Truth Social. If the current Iranian regime is unable to make Iran great again, why wouldn't there be a regime change? White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt later downplayed the comment, saying Trump was simply raising a question. The conflict raised fears of a wider regional war, especially after the US deployed bunker-buster bombs in its strikes on Iran's nuclear sites. Iranian officials claim that the facilities were evacuated of nuclear materials prior to the attacks. An Israeli source said the military hoped to end the war in the coming days, but noted this would depend on Iran's response. The ideal outcome, they said, would be a ceasefire and renewed negotiations over Iran's nuclear program. However, Israel was also preparing for a prolonged, low-intensity conflict if necessary. Among the Israeli military's latest targets was Evin Prison in Tehran, a facility known for detaining political prisoners and dual nationalists. Israeli forces reportedly damaged one of its gates in a symbolic strike. Iranian state media broadcast footage claiming operations inside the prison were stable, but human rights groups expressed concerns for the well-being of detainees. Israel also attacked roads surrounding the Fordo nuclear enrichment site, which was one of the targets of the US strike. The head of the UN's nuclear watchdog said heavy damage was likely. Iran insisted that sensitive materials were relocated prior to the attack. The human toll of the war continues to grow. In Israel, at least 24 people have died and more than 1,000 have been injured. Iranian casualties are far higher, according to the US-based group Human Rights Activists, which reported nearly 950 Iranians have been killed and over 3,400 wounded. The group identified hundreds of civilian and security personnel among the dead. In Moscow, Russian President Vladimir Putin met with Iran's foreign minister and condemned the Israeli and American strikes, calling them completely unprovoked acts of aggression. Russia, a close ally of Iran, has called for diplomatic efforts to end the conflict. Iranian officials say they successfully moved nearly all of their highly enriched uranium to a concealed location before the American airstrikes targeted several of the country's nuclear facilities. In a series of early morning strikes on Sunday, US B-2 stealth bombers and submarine-launched missiles struck 3 key Iranian enrichment sites, including the fortified Fordo complex. However, intelligence suggests that most of the enriched uranium previously stored at those locations had already been transferred. The airstrike operation, dubbed Midnight Hammer, was described by Trump as a major success. He claimed the mission had severely set back Iran's nuclear program, stating the US had dealt monumental damage to Iran's facilities at Fordo, Natanz, and Isfahan and taken the bomb right out of Iran's hands. However, those assertions have been called into question after senior American officials acknowledged they could not confirm the whereabouts of Iran's stockpile of uranium enriched close to weapons grade. Rafael Grossi, Director General of the International Atomic Energy Agency, said the agency was still working to determine what happened to Iran's highly enriched uranium. He confirmed that significant destruction was likely at Fordo, but noted inspectors hadn't been able to verify the presence of the material since prior to the Israeli-led strikes on June 13th. Vice President J.D. Vance hinted during an interview with ABC News that the uranium may have been moved just hours before the strikes. In the coming weeks, we'll be working to determine the next steps regarding that material, he said. Satellite imagery reviewed by a Polish defense firm, TS2 Space, showed increased activity around Fordo 2 days before the attacks. The presence of trucks, heavy equipment, and security vehicles suggested an urgent operation to relocate centrifuges or protective materials. It is suggested that Donald Trump's trigger-happy finger on his Truth social media platform is the reason why Iran had a heads up, as well as his remarks at the G7 summit, which he left early for no specific reason.
I have to be back as soon as I can.
I'm Anthony Davis. You can find me on the 5 Minute News YouTube channel and podcast, on Wednesdays co-hosting Uncovered, and on Sunday on The Weekend Show with Midas Touch.